The recent unrest gripping Los Angeles began with a series of flash raids conducted by Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE. These operations are designed to locate and detain undocumented immigrants for deportation. In recent weeks, the intensity and frequency of these raids have increased significantly across Southern California, leading to widespread fear and anger within many communities. Families have been separated, and the sudden, often forceful nature of these actions has created a climate of deep anxiety. The raids were part of a broader federal push to enforce immigration laws more aggressively, a cornerstone of President Trump's policy platform. This heightened federal activity sparked immediate and passionate protests across Los Angeles. Community organizers, immigration advocates, and concerned citizens took to the streets to voice their opposition. Initially, these demonstrations were largely peaceful, filled with marches, speeches, and calls for an end to the aggressive enforcement tactics. Protesters argued that the raids were inhumane and were tearing apart the fabric of their neighborhoods. They gathered outside federal buildings and in public squares, holding signs and chanting slogans to draw attention to their cause, hoping to pressure both local and federal officials to reconsider the current approach to immigration enforcement. As the days went on, the atmosphere began to change. While many continued to protest peacefully, some demonstrations saw the emergence of more confrontational elements. Tensions escalated, particularly during interactions between protesters and law enforcement. The initial peaceful gatherings on Friday and Saturday gave way to more chaotic scenes. By Sunday, the situation had deteriorated significantly, with reports of vandalism and property damage emerging from downtown Los Angeles. Rioters were seen throwing objects at police vehicles and setting fires, transforming the landscape of the protests into one of direct and destructive conflict. The core of the issue lies in the fundamental purpose of ICE raids and the reaction they provoke. The federal government views these actions as a necessary component of upholding national immigration laws and securing the country's borders. However, for many residents in cities like Los Angeles, which have large immigrant populations, these raids are seen as an assault on their communities. This deep division in perspective is what fueled the initial protests, creating a volatile environment where a disagreement over federal policy could quickly spiral into widespread civil unrest, setting the stage for an unprecedented clash between state and federal leadership. The disagreement over how to handle the escalating unrest in Los Angeles highlighted a stark contrast between President Donald Trump and California Governor Gavin Newsom. President Trump advocated for a powerful, federally led response to quell the violence. He believed that a strong show of force was necessary to restore order quickly and decisively. From his perspective, the local and state authorities were not doing enough to control the situation. He called for a crackdown on what he termed rioters and insurrectionists, insisting that federal law enforcement had to step in where he felt the state had failed to act with sufficient strength and resolve. Governor Newsom, on the other hand, favored a more measured, state-managed approach. He emphasized de-escalation and communication, believing that a heavy-handed federal intervention would only inflame the situation further. Newsom argued that the root cause of the protests, the aggressive ICE raids, needed to be addressed, rather than simply suppressing the public's reaction. He and Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass were accused by the White House of handicapping the Los Angeles Police Department by refusing to allow them to cooperate with federal agents on immigration enforcement, a policy consistent with California's sanctuary state laws, but viewed as obstruction by the Trump administration. This fundamental difference in philosophy led to a complete breakdown in communication between the two leaders. According to White House aides, President Trump gave Governor Newsom a 24-hour warning during a phone call on Friday to get the police in gear or face federal intervention. However, Governor Newsom vehemently denied this account, telling MSNBC that the claim was a lie and that the topic of federalizing the National Guard was never even mentioned during their 40-minute conversation. The two leaders have reportedly not spoken since that call, leaving their administrations to communicate through public statements and media appearances. The conflicting strategies represent two opposing views on American governance. Trump's approach emphasizes federal supremacy and the president's authority to enforce laws and maintain order, even if it means overriding state officials. Newsom's response champions states' rights and local control, arguing that state and local leaders are better equipped to handle crises within their own borders without what he sees as federal overreach. This clash is not just about a single protest in Los Angeles. It is a battle over the balance of power between the White House and the states, with the citizens of California caught directly in the middle. The conflict reached a boiling point when President Trump publicly suggested that Governor Newsom could be arrested for his handling of the crisis. This extraordinary statement marked a new level of hostility in the ongoing dispute. The idea was further amplified by key figures in his administration. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt stated that if Governor Newsom obstructs federal enforcement or breaks federal laws, then he is subjecting himself to arrest. This was not just a passing remark, it was a direct threat from the executive branch against the elected leader of the nation's most populous state, a move with little to no precedent in modern American history. Tom Homan, President Trump's influential border czar, echoed this sentiment, declaring that anyone who obstructs federal immigration enforcement, including the governor, would face charges. President Trump publicly voiced his support for Homan's position, solidifying the threat as official White House policy. The administration's argument was that by refusing to fully cooperate with federal ICE agents, Newsom was obstructing justice and failing to uphold federal law. This accusation transformed a policy disagreement into a quasi-criminal matter, framing the governor not as a political opponent, but as a potential lawbreaker subject to federal prosecution. Governor Newsom responded with alarm and defiance, characterizing the president's words as a dangerous slide toward authoritarianism. The President of the United States just called for the arrest of a sitting governor, Newsom stated in a press release. This is a day I hoped I would never see in America. He framed the threat not as a legitimate legal possibility, but as a politically motivated attack designed to intimidate and silence a dissenting voice. His administration quickly announced its intention to sue the Trump administration over the deployment of the National Guard, escalating the fight from the streets of Los Angeles to the nation's courtrooms. Legal experts have largely viewed the White House's threat with skepticism and concern. Erwin Chemerinsky, the dean of the UC Berkeley Law School, described the idea of arresting a governor over a policy dispute as truly unprecedented. He pointed out that even during the civil rights era, when Southern governors actively defied federal desegregation orders, presidents did not resort to arresting them. The consensus among many legal scholars is that such an action would be a profound abuse of power, blurring the lines between political disagreement and criminal conduct, and setting a perilous new precedent for federal-state relations. In a decisive move, President Trump took control of the California National Guard, federalizing the troops against the explicit wishes of Governor Newsom and other state officials. The initial order deployed 2,000 Guard members to Los Angeles for a period of up to 60 days. Their stated mission was to protect federal property, such as courthouses and administrative buildings, which had become focal points for the protests. The White House justified this action by claiming it was necessary to prevent and deter violence after what it described as a failure by local and state authorities to restore order, effectively bypassing the governor's command authority over his state's own forces. The deployment, however, did not immediately have its intended effect. Despite the presence of the National Guard, the worst of the violence occurred over the weekend after they arrived. This led the Trump administration to escalate its response even further. On Monday, a contingent of active-duty United States Marines was sent to supplement the Guard forces in Los Angeles. This move was particularly significant because it involved active-duty military personnel in a domestic law enforcement scenario, a line that is rarely crossed in the United States. The White House justified this by labeling some rioters as insurrectionists, signaling a potential move to invoke the Insurrection Act. The Insurrection Act is a centuries-old federal law that gives the president the authority to deploy the military within the United States to suppress civil disorder, insurrection, or rebellion. Invoking this act would grant the military law enforcement powers, allowing them to make arrests and control crowds, a role traditionally reserved for local police. The administration's use of the term insurrectionists is seen by many legal observers as a deliberate step to lay the groundwork for such a declaration. This raises profound legal and constitutional questions about the militarization of domestic crises and the role of the armed forces on American soil. The situation remains incredibly tense and legally ambiguous. The federalization of the National Guard against a governor's will, the deployment of active-duty Marines, and the threat of invoking the Insurrection Act have created a constitutional showdown. Governor Newsom is challenging the federal government's actions in court, while President Trump insists he has the authority to act unilaterally to restore law and order. This conflict is more than just a political feud, it is a test of the constitutional limits of presidential power and the fundamental principles that govern the relationship between the federal government and the individual states.